Hi everybody, Josh here. I want to offer a special Dvar Torah for Shabbos Zachor, where we read the most important Maftir of the whole year, right before Purim, in which we are commanded to remember, not to forget the memory of Amalek. It's confusing. Remember, forget, don't remember. Well, we're going to explore that complicated mitzvah right now. This is called erasing and addressing the memory. Shabbat Zachor. This Shabbat, we read the most compulsory maftir in the whole lectionary, that means Torah reading, cycle, that of Parshat Zachor. In this short yet essential pericope, only 3 verses long, we read of the mitzvah to forget the memory, Zachor, of Amalek. The placement in the calendar of this reminder to forget makes sense, since the maftir is read every year the Shabbos before Purim, and the legendary villain of that holiday, Haman, is described in Esther as an Agagite, and Agag was a king of the Amalek nation, as we see in 1 Samuel chapter 15. This commandment is troubling on a number of levels. Firstly, many Jews, especially in the modern period, have misgivings about a mitzvah that some interpret as commanding genocide, an inhuman act. How could our God, who is passionate for justice, ask us to do such a thing? Secondly, besides its moral quality, the content of the mitzvah seems incoherent. How can we be asked to remember, to forget, a memory? It seems contradictory. Let's begin by addressing the second question first. And in doing so, we will also end up responding to the first question as well. There are a number of portions in the Torah that describe that paramilitary campaign of terror wrought by Amalek. Indeed, we recently read the Torah's description of the battle in the desert shortly before the people of Israel reached Mount Sinai. However, the parsha that we are tasked with reading on Shabbat Zachor is not the description of the actual event, but rather of its impact. The Maftir is taken from Devarim, chapter 25, 17-19, which strictly deals with God's instructing the people on the cusp of entering Canaan to both remember the villainous Amalek, but also, paradoxically, to erase their memory from the face of the earth. The Torah exhibits an understanding of trauma here, which lives on more in the memory of those impacted than as an external event. It haunts the psyche. So the object of God's command is in memory, describing the paradoxical situation in which many victims of trauma find themselves, reliving the memory, but trying to move forward, stuck between remembering and forgetting. So ultimately, the commandment to wipe out Amalek, according to my interpretation here, is not actually about the physical persons of that wicked nation, but rather its memory. Indeed, that is just how Rambam, in his law code, the Mishnah Torah, Laws of Kings and Wars 5.5, frames the mitzvah. He writes, "It is a positive commandment to destroy the memory, Zachor, of Amalek." Perhaps instead of this being a martial obligation to destroy a people, it is a mitzvah focused on the psyche of those that nation has harmed. We live under the cloud of Amalek's cruelty and violence. Particular to their paramilitary tactics was to strike at the back of the camp, where the elderly and sickly marched. That is, those most vulnerable. They practiced a kind of terroristic warfare in which the main result was how they could destabilize the society they attacked, which undermined general senses of safety and well-being. Israel had just undergone a radical change in the way they lived, from servitude, which itself was founded in trauma and terror, to a nascent liberation. And it was just as they were taking their first shaky steps of freedom that a wicked nation arrived and tried to show them, us, that we, would never be safe again. As Israel stood on the border of Canaan after living through a 40-year period of instability, learning the hard lessons of independence, they were posed that question once more. Now that they were free and about to truly start their lives, could they ever feel safe again? In the Maftir, God says, "When God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, in the land that God has given you as your portion, erase the memory of Amalek. Do not forget." God offers words of assurance amidst the command to remember our tormentors. Yes, they hurt you, and you carry that wound inside you, but safety is still available to you. and I will make sure you feel it again. No, freedom does not mean being free from danger, free from struggle, or free from hardship. But that which Amalek tried to instill in you, a feeling that you will never be or feel safe again, that God commands you, us, to work to forget. But we are still left with the seeming contradiction, the stira. The mitzvah is to erase the memory of Amalek, but we are also commanded not to forget. How can we combine memory and forgetting? In the above-cited halacha, Rambam writes, it is a positive commandment to perpetually remember its wicked deeds, to arouse its hatred. Now that's surprising, maybe even taking you aback. Maimonides explicates that the mitzvah is to never forget the wickedness of Amalek, as it serves a necessary pedagogical purpose, to awaken its hatred. This is surprising, as it seems that Rambam interprets what God wants as locking us in hatred forever. We seem to have gone from one psychic torment of trauma to another, condemned to never move on from hating those who hurt us. We're imprisoned once more in that trauma. However, if we read on in the halacha, we see that we have misread to whom the hatred belongs. It says at the end, from tradition we have learned to remember with our mouths, but not to forget in our hearts. It is forbidden to forget Amalek's hatred and enmity. In the original appearance of hatred, it appears the same way, a possessive noun in the third person, sinato. It's not for us, it's their hatred. That is, the hatred is not to belong to us, but rather it is core to Amalek's identity. Their wickedness was defined by their hatred and their cruelty. Tradition instructs us to proactively remember each year by reading this portion and not to forget in our hearts the cruelty and hatred that Amalek embodied. It cannot be that God wants us to defeat Amalek by becoming just like them, a nation defined by hatred. Rather, we recall Amalek and ensure we remember what made them the focus of God's justice, their hatred, their cruelty. On the cusp of our holiday of victory and triumph, we stand on a similar precipice as our ancestors did, awaiting the fulfillment of their freedom. A people who has suffered historic wrongs risks seeing itself perpetually as a victim, as eternally defined by the cruelties and terror wreaked upon us. However, we are tasked to forget, something especially difficult for the traumatized to accomplish, but necessary if one is not to live life forever under the sign of that trauma. We progress from the belief that we can never be safe again. We move forward from a life struck through with fear. But God also wants to make sure that freedom does not become arrogance, that safety does not become chauvinism. We are commanded to remember Amalek for what it is, so we know just what it is we can never allow ourselves to become. Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it, as they say. To healthily and productively move on from trauma, we extricate ourselves from its midst and gain distance from it. And with that distance, we can look boldly and directly at it, seeing exactly what it is made of, and commit ourselves to a life and a world in which we erase such cruelty and such hatred from ever appearing again under the heavens. So may it be. Shabbat Zachor, Shalom. Josh. Shabbat Shalom.